Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Good day, may be another way to do it, though some of you may be on a different day by now. Um, and welcome. This talk is about looking at traditional forms of religious education in a couple of contexts and how that might be going with tech these days. We have two very distinguished speakers with us this afternoon, or this day. Sorry, don't want to restrict the time to mine. Dr. Hanan Alexander is Professor Emeritus of Philosophy of Education at the University of Haifa in Israel, where he served as Dean of the Faculty of Education, Dean of Students, Head of the International School, and Head of the Center for Jewish and Democratic Education. He currently also serves as Koret Visiting Professor of Israel Studies in the Helen Diller Center for Jewish Law and Israel Studies and Visiting Professor of Education in the School of Education at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Alexander was ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary of America and earned a PhD in Education and Humanities from Stanford University. He has published 9 books and more than 140 essays in academic and professional journals. His first book, Reclaiming Goodness, Education and the Spiritual Quest, won a 2001 National Jewish Book Award from the National Jewish Book Council. Longtime REA members know of Hanan's decades-long contributions to REA, including as president of the association. I'll introduce Dr. Aslan now too. Dr. Ednan Aslan is a professor at the Institute for Islamic Theological Studies at the Faculty of Catholic Theology at the University of Vienna and is head of the Department for Islamic Religious Education at the Center for Teaching Education. Dr. Aslan graduated from the University of Applied Sciences in Esslingen in 1988. He studied theology and political science at the universities of Tübingen and Stuttgart. He received his doctorate for his research on the religious education of Muslim children in Austria and Germany. Dr. Aslan has been a professor of Islamic religious education since 2008. Now, he is new to REA, but he has a long history of hosting conferences like these on Islamic education in Europe, and has had a couple of our members be dialogue partners in those conferences. He likewise has a number of books, especially edited volumes that have come out of those conferences. Anyway, the upside is these two are friends, and they've known each other for a while. So we're looking forward to a live conversation between them this afternoon. When I sent this invitation, I asked them to think about how education of children has been done in their respective traditions and what might be changing with the advent of all of this technology. Dr. Alexander, I invite you to start us off.
So Eileen, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be on the panel with my good friend Ednan Aslan. We were just together at his home just this week, and it's wonderful to be together with you, and it's wonderful to be back at REA in this extraordinary technological context. I was complimenting Alex just a few minutes ago. The sessions that I've been in are extraordinary, and the fact that we can all sort of sit across the world and have this conversation is an amazing thing in and of itself. So I'll talk about that in a bit. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to talk in 3 parts. Sort of the first part is my bet is most of you don't have a sense of the contexts in which Jewish education actually takes place. So I want to give a bit of a survey of where Jewish education happens, not only traditionally happens, but where it happens right now, today. And there might be some places that you hadn't thought about before as forms of Jewish education. So I sort of want to do that first. Then, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how technology has and is affecting those contexts of Jewish education. That's sort of part two. And then part three is to talk about sort of the advantages and disadvantages of how this technological revolution might be impacting Jewish education. So that's sort of the broad framework that I'll begin with. Probably one of the best known essays in the study of Jewish education. It was actually one of the earliest essays in research on Jewish education, which is a relatively new discipline as education in all of our traditions is a new discipline, is an essay by Walter Ackerman, who actually preceded me as the vice president of the University of Judaism, and then moved on in a career very similar to mine to Ben Gurion University, and I moved from the University of Judaism to the University of Haifa. The title of that essay was Jewish Education for What? And so in order to talk about Jewish education, we have to first talk about the what. What is the Jewish part of Jewish education? There's a very well-known book by the German philosopher, modern Jewish philosopher Leo Beck, called The Essence of Judaism. And he talks about sort of three commonplaces of Judaism, three essential ideas: God, Torah, and the people of Israel. And when you're talking about Jewish education, you're talking about those three things. And it's important to identify that because two of those three things, God and Torah, are essentially religious ideas. They're not exclusively religious ideas because Judaism is an ancient tradition. Long before we made distinctions between religion and politics, King David was establishing the first centralizing the worship in the temple in Jerusalem for his son Solomon to build. So the relationship between politics and religion in Judaism is a very close one, and that's why the third concept, the people of Israel, is a national or collective or ethnic. The terms that we use to describe it, that sort of depending on the period of time. But I'm going to use the terms religious and political because they sort of fit our current context, which means that a bunch of Jewish education takes place in and around things that involve religion. And here, Eileen, I'm going to talk about synagogues as opposed to the temple, because actually in Jewish tradition, after King David, there was only one temple. Actually, there was a fight about that, which divided, those of you that know a little bit of biblical history, which divided the Judea from the northern kingdoms. But the temple was in Jerusalem. We just saw a wonderful presentation of Herod's temple in Jerusalem. The use of the temple to describe synagogues is a relatively modern thing that was a particular approach to Reform Judaism that is not actually even accepted by most Reform Jews today. So I'm going to use the term synagogue or congregation or community, but it's centered around a worship and prayer and the kinds of things that we would normally associate with religion. But the other aspect of Jewish education involves identification with the Jewish people. And identification with the Jewish people is a broad concept, but the truth is that the most salient symbol of that identification today, and the place where identification with Jewish life as a form of national identity, or you might say citizenship, is with the state of Israel. So when I talk about Jewish education, I'm going to talk about both that stuff that's related to synagogues and ritual and the things that we normally associate with religion, and also the things that we associate with politics and so on. And as we move along, I'm going to say something about education in Israel. The truth is that the largest project of Jewish education extant today is state Jewish education in the state of Israel, state-sponsored education in Israel. There's about 1.6 million, 1.7 million Jewish kids in schools. being educated as Jews in the state of Israel, in addition to Arabic-speaking Muslims, Jews, and Christians, also in Israel state education. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, because some of the most interesting technological developments are actually happening in Israel through state-sponsored education. So in the diaspora, that is to say, outside of Israel, most Jewish education takes place in the framework of religious ideologies centered around synagogues. Liberal ideologies, reform and conservative. In modern Jewish life, we use the term conservative to describe a liberal Jewish ideology. It's a little bit strange, and of course forms of orthodoxy, and broadly, Jewish education is voluntary. It's structured from early childhood education across synagogues, across denominations, and within secular institutions such as Jewish community centers. Early childhood education is probably the most pervasive form of formal Jewish education that takes place across the diaspora, certainly in North America, which is the largest of the Jewish diasporas, but also across Europe. I was just visiting Vienna. I visited the beautiful synagogue in Vienna, and they have a very active early childhood education program. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But centered around the liberal movements, Jewish education tends to be in a form of supplementary education, something like synagogues, something like Sunday schools, a meeting on Sundays and weekdays after school. In the United States, those schools have gone by different names, sometimes Hebrew school, sometimes religious school, sometimes congregational school. Hebrew language is an important part of the curriculum of those schools. But the main issue is that Jewish kids will go to some other educational setting, usually a public school in the United States or a state-sponsored school, and then they'll receive their Jewish education in a supplemental setting. Whereas in the Orthodox community, most Jewish kids go to dedicated Jewish schools, much like parochial Catholic schools, except that these schools have a very intense dual curriculum, a secular curriculum that would be similar to what Jewish kids would get in a public school, and then a very intense curriculum. And here I would talk about God and Torah. In particular, in the Jewish tradition, we talk about Torah in terms of two kinds of Torah: the written Torah, what many of you might call the Old Testament, but what we call the oral Torah. The oral Torah is Mishnah and Talmud. Mishnah and Talmud are the rabbinic interpretations of Jewish tradition, which actually form the largest corpus of the study of Judaism that's transmitted in the curriculum, and they form a large portion of the Orthodox day school curriculum. Usually, the sacred studies take place in the morning. The secular studies take place in the afternoon. But there's also a large network of informal Jewish education, youth groups centered oftentimes around synagogues, but also educational tours, gap year programs on college campuses, Hillel, that you might be familiar with, and over the last 25 or 30 years, the Chabad Hasidic movement has also developed active informal education on campus. And then in the tertiary at higher education, there's a network in the diaspora of Jewish studies programs that have developed, the departments of Jewish studies or centers of Jewish studies across American Jewish universities, which is those that have some interest in Judaism, where most Jewish kids at the university level would receive some form of Jewish education. In Israel, on the other hand, education is mandatory. Israel has mandatory education laws, and so education takes place in a very different framework. There is a required ECE requirement. Everybody has a required kindergarten paid for by the state, and the streams of education are divided into three groups. There are secular Jewish schools, sometimes called general state schools, that combine the different political movements of the Zionist movement, and both in the ECE primary and secondary schools. There are religious state schools, which are Orthodox schools that are sponsored by the state. and they're also ultra-Orthodox schools. Haredi is the Hebrew term for ultra-Orthodox. So there are three streams of schools in the Israeli structure, and these are all there are truancy laws. Everybody from kindergarten, from pre-kindergarten, from the age of 3 until the age of 17, children are required to attend school, which is why there's such a large number of children in Jewish schools. There's also a very, very large higher education segment in Israel. Over 50% of Israeli youngsters receive some form of higher education, about 55%, in 8 research universities, 24 teachers' colleges, and half a dozen or so other academic colleges. All of those provide various forms of Jewish education. And for Jewish Israelis, the army, service in the army, which is mandatory. There's a mandatory draft. It's a people's army. Service in the army is an active form of education. In fact, because of the sectoral structure of Israeli education, according to ideological streams, the army and then the university, I sometimes call them the public school. They're the common school of Israeli society, the place where Israeli young people meet. So that's a broad sort of picture of the structure. And it's very different within the Jewish and democratic state of Israel and in communities abroad. And today, more Jews live in Israel than live abroad. So if we're talking about Jewish education, the Israeli connection is extraordinarily significant. If you look at this across, now I'm moving to the second theme of my talk, which is the sort of how technology has affected this. And what I would broadly say is that the ways in which technology has developed broadly within educational circles, it has affected, so too has it affected Jewish education. So, for example, in diaspora Jewish education, in the early days of audiovisual techniques for language instruction, we had audiovisual forms of Hebrew learning. I myself, 50 years ago, learned Hebrew in a system called Habet Ushma, which is an audiovisual form of the same. I had a similar kind of thing in my French class in high school and in my Hebrew school class in elementary school and secondary school. As those technologies became more sophisticated, so too Hebrew language instruction also became more sophisticated. And one of the interesting things to point out is the very structure of a Jewish text. I generally don't like to use PowerPoints because I find that we communicate better directly if I use a PowerPoint. You look at the picture rather than communicating. But one picture that would be really interesting would be to look at a page of Talmud, because of the way in which a page of Talmud is itself an interactive text. On the center of a page of Talmud, you have a Mishnah, which is a 2nd century text, followed by interpretations called Gemara, which are 4th and 5th century texts, and surrounded on the columns are interpretations that go up to the 12th, 13th, 14th, 17th century, all on the same page, sometimes answering the same question. So there's an interactive technology. At the plenary, when we opened, when people wanted to talk about what's the most important technology, I was going to talk about this text, but it's kind of sui generis. Although the digital technology has exploded using these kinds of interactive methods that have been found on the page for centuries. So similarly, in early childhood education. When there was Sesame Street, developed by public television in the United States, Israeli educational network, and this is an important thing to mention, there is an Israeli education television network that is a function of the Ministry of Education that's existed for as long as the ministry has existed, that is for 77 years. And they developed a Hebrew version of Sesame Street in Hebrew for Hebrew-speaking Israelis, but also an English-speaking version. It was called Rehov Sumsum. Rehov Sumsum is the Hebrew translation of Sesame Street. So that when early childhood education went on television, so Jewish education went on television, and Rehov Sumsum lasted as long as Sesame Street lasted, and those network programs are still being used. But among the most exciting developments that are happening in Israel are happening around the technological revolution. For maybe 25 or 30 years, we have a center in Israel for innovative technological education called Matach, Merkaz L'Chinuch Technologi, and it has been doing online education now of a variety of different digital technologies for centuries, for decades. One interesting byproduct of this is that in the curriculum of the state school, the general state schools, which serve a cultural humanistic form of Judaism, have Bible as a required subject matter, Bible taught as an academic subject matter, with both traditional interpretations, but also historical and literary criticism. In the religious streams, Bible is taught as a traditional text, but there's a common internet site known as Mikranet. Mikra is the Hebrew word for Bible. And Mikranet is essentially a website in which Bible teachers from across the system exchange lesson plans, materials, and so on and so forth, and also digital technologies that they can use. Probably the most exciting development was a Center for Excellence in Research known as LINKS, Learning in a Networked Society, which was funded by the by the Council for Higher Education. Actually, it was an inter-university project, but the center of that happened to be at the University of Haifa and our Faculty of Education. And one of the interesting things about the work that they did is that LINKS was essentially developing the innovative technologies for the entire school system, including STEM subjects, including humanities subjects, including subjects of Jewish education. Some of the most interesting dissertations of Jewish education I've seen have come out of the LINKS project. But what they've done is developed a conception of communities of educational knowledge and practice. So they've developed a humanistic conception of education through technology, which is unique. So that's a little bit a quick and dirty survey of some of the things that had happened. Advantages. So advantages in part are the extraordinary innovative technologies innovative pedagogies that have developed, especially the student-centered pedagogies. And here I would recommend those that are interested in Jewish education. Ari Kelman at Stanford has a new book out called Jewish Education, and his focus in this book on Jewish education is to switch from teaching-centered, subject matter centered to student centered. And the focus on student centered is the shift that's taking place from the learning sciences as a focus across the educational system. Ari does that in his book with regard to Jewish education. A second advantage that I would identify is the connections across distance. Just like we're connected here across continents and so on and so forth, worship now takes place. Those that are not formally Sabbath observant can participate in worship, especially since the pandemic. A Torah study online, sermons online, a host of resources are now available across the system, both for primary, secondary, and adult learning. Disadvantages. I would say probably the greatest disadvantage of the technological revolution for Jewish identity in general has been the proliferation, especially since October 7th, the proliferation of the delegitimization of the state of Israel and of the Jewish people in general, and the horrible rise of anti-Semitism that has resulted in. If we have time, I can talk about that a little bit more as we move along. But in general, one of the disadvantages, in my view, of the technological revolution has been the ability to transmit not only hate but also false narratives of a whole variety of kinds across the system. It's led me, in fact, and Ednan knows this, to question my faith in interfaith religious dialogue. Because I haven't seen the kinds of responses that I would have thought to this sort of hateful proliferation across the system. And part of what it does, and I'm going to finish with this and then try and finish on a positive note. Oftentimes, young people will only get their exposure to Jewish life, or their most extensive exposure, through social media, where they get exposure to other things. So one of the crucial issues, this is now the positive message out of the negative, one of the crucial issues that seems to me that we need to be thinking about in religious education is digital critical digital literacy. That is to say, the capacity of our young people to distinguish between lies and falsehoods and the perpetration of hate across the system that draws, sadly, on ancient in the case of Jews, ancient Jewish themes, blood libels, that Jews are bloodthirsty, that they seek to murder children, that they seek to use the blood of children for ritual purposes, and so on and so forth, become now things that were once forbidden to be spoken, now have become popular, and people are able to say it across line. And part of our obligation as religious educators is to help create the kind of critical digital literacy for young people to be able to distinguish the one from the other. So maybe I'll stop there, and let's hear what Ednan has to say about Islamic education.
Thank you, Hanan. Eileen, I start. Okay, thank you so much, Hanan. My name is Ednan Aslan, and I am calling from Vienna. Eileen, thank you so much for your invitation. I will talk a little bit about Islamic education, but my same main subject, what is the consequences of new technology for religious education, especially in European context. I won't be able to speak quickly like Hanan, but I do my best. I assume that everybody knows what religious education is, but in Islamic context, main task of Islamic education, how can we understand God? How can we read his main text, Quran, at the language of Prophet Muhammad? It means Hadith. It is more than 1,500 years big challenge for the Islamic religious education. How can we deal with the language of God? How can we understand him? In my first part, I will talk about what makes perhaps education Islamic, but it means education morally. What means Islamic education? If I am talking Islamic education in European context, it means at the public school and Islamic communities. It has very old tradition in Islamic countries, that we have a lot of madrasa, Islamic schools, and state schools. We are teaching at the public school. It is really very big, differently countries which doing religious education in their school. Islam has very old learning tradition, that is a lot to say about it. We have differently countries. For example, the Islamic education in Turkey is different than Islamic education Afghanistan. We have different education in Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and they are very diverse and different. We cannot talk about this country. Hanan, not easy. Hanan talk about Israel, but about Islamic countries to talk, it is not easy. In European context, Islam has always been present, but Muslims have remained in many European countries as a part of this countries. It's a new challenge European society for the Muslims as well. We have now tried to dealing with this new challenge. how can we integrate the Islamic education? How can we integrate the Muslim population in a Christian context, like in Europe and different European countries? Islamic education means teaching the children about their religion, enabling them to reflect on its content in new contexts, develop a new dynamic identity in a pluralistic society. However, this desire shouldn't be viewed in a uniform manner. It is very diverse, ranging from liberal pluralistic education, plural liberalistic idea to extremist ideas in different European countries. We have differently communities, we have differently understanding of religious education in European countries. Here in Europe, there are different models. In countries such as Austria and Germany, we organize religious education in cooperation with the state at the public schools, alongside mosques and communities that offer their own programs. You know, this Islamic organization from different countries, from Turkey, from African countries, from Arab countries, their program for religious education very diverse. There are also countries such, for example, such Italy, that only offer Catholic religious education. Some other countries offer ethics instead of religions. By this, I mean that the range of options is really very different. But the new technology in religious education are not only transforming the schools and society, they are also profoundly challenging for the religions and religious education. Such changes secretly rooted in traditional religious contexts, yet we must confront it. Digital technologies are shaping boundaries. Children and young people now seek religious guidance exclusively from the traditional authorities or institutions. Increasingly, they turn to digital tools such as GPT and different social media, and often receive answer faster than from God himself with little efforts. I recently read a book in Turkish about whether in this age of transhumanism, we need to redefine humanity and our concept of God. Because this question completely confuses our idea about God. We live a world deeply shaped digital media, communication, interaction, and notion of religion, identity, and society are now and linked with digital technology. This applies especially to young people and particularly to young Muslims growing up in Europe. In our study, Muslim religious identity in digital transformation, we examined how young Muslims in Austria engage with media representation of Islam, especially those spread through social media. We are particularly interested in how these digital discourses shape their self-understanding, religious orientation, and identity formation. Our starting point is clear. Media are not merely sources of information, they shape reality. Young Muslims are not passive consumers of media, they interact, posting, comment, and share. These digital practices form part of their religious expressions. They negotiate online what it means to be a Muslim today in European context. Digital transformation has led a state we call on life. The dissociation of boundaries between online and offline. virtual physical reality. Religious experiences are no longer confined to mosques or communities, but occur on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, or WhatsApp groups. Traditional religious authorities are increasingly challenged by the influencer, blogs, algorithm-driven content. New spaces are emerging, so-called third space, where young Muslims engage with religious content creatively and critically. This space offers opportunity for exchange and autonomy, but they also carry risk, fragmentation, commercialization, and radicalization in Islamic contexts. Representation is a crucial issue. Islam still often associated in traditional media with violence, backwardness, refusal to integration of Muslim in European countries. Many of our interviews reported experiences, daily stigmatization of Muslim youths in European countries. In both traditional social media, some reported, for example, about their experiences of daily stigmatization in different European countries. In both traditional and social media, some respond with role, others with reflection or creation of their own religious identity and narratives. This finding in our research demonstrate that religiosity of young Muslim and hybrid, dynamic and mediated through media. It moves between family tradition, social networks, theological discourses, and personal experiences in European contexts in different countries. This poses a clear challenge for science, education, and politics. This complex process of identity formation must not only be understood, they must be constructively spotted by politicians, by educators. Schools can play a central role if they open themselves to digital realities and plural identities of new Muslim students at their school. For young people who do not attend religious education at the public schools or mosques, digital offerings by religious organizations are becoming increasingly relevant. Those organizations are professionalizing their digital presence through YouTube channels or their own websites. Countries of their origins also play an important role in this process. They disseminate religious content strategically via social media, which can be contribute to isolation or integration. In European mosque, religious education typically takes place in their mother language. For example, if you have Turkish population, they are talking in their mosque in Turkish. If you have people, for example, from Arabic language, they are talking in Arabic language, because we have in the mosque communities not German, for example, or the language of country, more their language of their countries. Many parents value religious education in their mother language, actually, as language closely linked to the religion. Turkish is a part of Islamic religion for Turkish population, for example. In Germany, Arabic language is a part of their religious identity. For some, losing the language, mother language, also means losing their religious identity, religious connection to their countries. Religions and language is not easy to divide. At the same time, we observe that younger generation in European countries increasingly prefer the national language like German or English, a shift that they nonetheless preceded by influence from countries of origins. In addition, the countries of origins, like Turkey or Egypt or different countries, are investing more in religious institutions abroad and are exerting influence over diaspora communities through financial support, personal and curricula. Many organizations operating in Europe are directly or indirectly governed by actors from abroad. This raises questions about loyalty and integration and balance between integration and traditional influence from their origins country. Ongoing migration, transnational marriages, and the arrival spouses from abroad continue to shape local religious community. For decades, migration was not taken seriously a permanent reality in many European countries. It is only since the events of September 11 that European societies have begun to address migration more seriously, often forever through a security lens rather than one of inclusion, integration, and education. Religious authorities, especially those with traditional structures, are increasingly clashing with younger generation in Islamic community who demand transparency, relevance, and digital accessibility. Generational divide is leading to a confrontation of religious legitimacy and authority in many European countries. In the same time we are talking about this, Islamophobia continues to rise across Europe, while religious extremism in Islamic context gain ground among some marginalized young people in different countries. After the events of Gaza in war, extremist actors in European countries appear to have become more so emboldened, increasingly targeted emotionality, vulnerable young people through digital propaganda. Extremist groups in Islamic context are now reaching children even at primary school level. In certain urban areas, the big cities, Berlin, London, they dominate the local infrastructure, while young youth offenders are getting younger. For example, many consume extremist content directly online and differently social media. In Austria, for example, some recently arrested radicalized young people were under than 14 years of age. In our project, one of the important projects in German language, it calls Hey Imam. They aim to develop counter narratives for young people. Traditional religious authorities are losing their influence for young people. Young people no longer seek guidance in a mosque, but on TikTok or other platforms. Media are increasingly replacing families and mosques as a space of religious learning. According at the latest Youth Internet Monitor, for example, in Australia, 96% of young people in Australia are using WhatsApp, 95% use YouTube, 1 use Instagram, more than 75% TikTok. Platforms like Discord, Roblox are also gaining popularity among the young people between 11 to 14 years old. This diversity reflects a complex web of content, platforms, and social functions, a form of hypermediality that defines the everyday lives of the younger generation. How do this media influence identity constructions is the question. Such one colleague, Mr. Coy, describes identity works as a patchwork, shaped by external factors, cultural, media-related, religions, and individual elements. People strive coherence for community in thought, feeling, and behavior. The freer individuals are to act, the more creatively they express their identity, and they do so to their own life, actually. It is my first part, what I have to say about the religious education and consequences of digital technology on the religious education in European countries. Thank you so much that you are hearing me. Thank you.
Thank you both for laying this foundation. I'm going to see first if Hanan wants to add anything in the wake of what Ednan has just said. And then we might start into the conversation more.
Well, Ednan and I have actually, amongst ourselves, talked about this quite a bit, and we both ended in the same place, really, from a different point of view, which is the radicalization of the impact of social media on the radicalization of young Muslims, and its direct impact on relation between Muslims and Jews. I wonder, Ednan, if you have any thoughts about, things we might do programmatically together in order to address the threat that poses, because it's a threat that this is a threat not only to Jews, it's a threat to Muslims. I mean, the way I've talked about this sometimes is, well, I consider Pope John Paul II one of the great spiritual leaders of all time. And one of the reasons I think he was a great spiritual leader of all time, because he recognized that he had to transform Catholic theology in order to save the church. He had to change the relation between Christians and Jews after the Holocaust in order to save the church, because anti-Semitism is a social destroying disease. It does more damage to the societies. It does damage to Jews, to individual Jews, and all hate does damage. But it's a disease that devours societies. It devoured all of Europe in the course of the last century, and now it's eating away at the great Islamic civilizations of the world through this radicalization. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about what we might be able to do in order to combat some of those problems.
Well, and I think
I am sorry. Okay.
You go ahead. I might take the question, the programmatic question, a little deeper, but go ahead and answer first. I guess
You
I have
know,
thoughts too.
if you ask me, at the moment, what is biggest challenge for Islamic education? This new technology is a really big challenge for Islamic education. Second part is this Islamic radicalization in Europe. It is a big challenge for us. How can we deal with this new situation? And we can find perhaps a solution for this problem in different countries, Germany or Syria. But do you know this migration everywhere, more migration through the European countries bring more challenge, more religious identity. And this challenge is very diverse. The people from Afghanistan for the public school, one challenge. If you have people from Syria, next challenge. All of the new migration bring us to back, to the roots. How can we how the Islamic communities, deal with this new challenge is really not clear. How can we deal with this new situation? Because of that, after Gaza war, we have in European countries Islamophobia, but and all of the extremists after Gaza war become more emboldened. They can do more. For example, before Gaza Creek, it was not easy to talk about Israel, to talk about extremism really very open, but now it is a part of normality. At the public school, extremism not just in secondary level, we have really same challenge in primary schools in different countries. But I think religious education can be a part of freedom in European society, but it is possible that religions, not just Islam, all of the religions can be part of this confrontation. Because of that, we need really one program. How can the religions, how can the Islam, a part of peace, a part of the radicalization in European society? We are working on it. This book I can really recommend it to everybody. This is a good research. Muslim religious identity in digital transformation. It is a good research about it. What happened in young Muslim in European context. I think it is challenges same in different countries in Europe and in Asia.
I think that the question of how to teach young people to bring critical awareness to what they're finding on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube, in Discord, etc., is an issue for all of us. I don't use broadcast television, so I got most of my news about the conclave and Pope Leo from YouTube. Well, what that means is that YouTube's algorithms are now feeding me endless amounts of Pope Leo information, right? I have a PhD and I can't always tell what's true and what's not. I have to go research. There was one a couple of days ago about 5 critical appointments that Pope Leo has made. No, these were all made up. It was all fake. And so that was hard to, if it took me a second thought to figure that out and to do some research, how much time does any one person have to do the research necessary to sort out the fakes from the real stories, and the biases in the videos from the clear version, the true versions. And so I wonder if including more how to do critical consciousness about media technology is something that can be or should be more integrated into our Islamic schools, our Jewish schools, our Christian education, etc. Thoughts?
Well, but part of the, I mean, there's a whole set of really complex issues, and I'm interested to hear what others have thoughts, because I imagine there's a great deal of wisdom among people in the community of that we've assembled to talk about this. But I would add one piece to this that also needs to be unpacked, which is that there's the radicalization that takes place. It's both. It's a radicalization not only amongst Muslims, but also among young Muslims. But it's also a form of radicalization that receives a form of academic legitimacy through a variety of what we sometimes call critical social theory that provides academic legitimacy to the radicalization process. And part of what we can do in the academy, sometimes when I'm asked about this, I say we have to do our job. Part of our job is to criticize ideas. That's what we do in the academy. That's actually what we do best, more than anything else, when we do it well. And I think that there's a variety of traditions that have found ways of protecting themselves from criticism that we need to put before us and to talk about more generally. And they have a great deal of influence in religious education as well. Sometimes to cleanse, sometimes we call this cleansing critical progressivism of what Ednan has called radicalization, and that's a hard thing to do, but it's work I think that in which we need to engage.
Do you know, Eileen? Do you know, in TikTok we are now producing a lot of videos in frame of this Hey Imam project. In TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, you know, it is not intellectual debate in social media, just slogans and fragments. It is, you know, it is the new reality of religions. For example, I have more than 30 books. Some of my students or people on the streets know me from TikTok, not from my books. It is, you know, if you are from TikTok. But unfortunately, this is not without any dangers. You know, if you go to social media in European context, you need police protections too. It is, you know, not easy to go to do social media. You know, I know what I am saying. You know, different imams in online imam and in online TikTok, Instagram, you can find a lot of imams. They are talking about Islam, but you cannot find an intellectual debate about Islam. It's a big danger if you go to the social media, TikTok, Instagram, we lose the tradition. Okay, perhaps sometimes it's okay, but we lose the reality of religions. What means religions? We have now the face of religion, social media, and we have the reality of religions in the families, in the societies. Now this is a big balance between tradition and social media. How can we create a new picture of religions. But without social media, without digital media, we cannot teach. But we have to know digital media has his own message, his own religion. If we go to social media, we lose something from our religion, which we know from our own traditions. It is really not easy. If I read sometimes the posting under of videos, sometimes I am asking myself what I am doing really.
But I wonder, for example, I mean, there's a lot of talk in universities about how to respond to radicalization. And one of the responses of this famous, I think it was Justice Frankfurter, who said that the best response to bad speech is more speech. I wonder if one of the things we've learned in this conference is that the cyberspace provides among its advantages extraordinary opportunities for dialogue, for exchange. I mean, there's lots of bad things it does. We're talking here about some of the bad things, but some of the good things it does is provide here. Look, we're all sitting across the world here, and we're talking to each other. That's an amazing opportunity, and I wonder if YouTube or TikTok or some of these other or WhatsApp might be used as a way to put out alternative messages.
Yes.
Of Christians, Jews, and Muslims talking to each other about interpretations of our traditions that are wholesome and helpful and supportive of one another, rather than hateful and derisive of one another. That's not a direct. That's not. I mean, and we can do that in ways that are emotional and not necessarily intellectual. That are not about arguments. I mean, one really nice example of this, as Eileen mentioned in her very kind introduction, I'm spending a bunch of time at UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley has an anti-Semitism project that's sponsored by a bunch of different people on campus. A really interesting project. And one of the things they've put out is a YouTube video, a quick and dirty history of anti-Semitism, in stick figures, and it's really great. And you can go to the Center for Jewish Studies at UC Berkeley and go to the Anti-Semitism Education Project and find this video. But for the campus, it was because lots of things, people like me, I'll refer to things and people won't know what you're talking about because they've never heard of this before. I remember the first time Ednan invited me to one of his conferences, and I said, I can't do this and I can't do that and I can't do the other thing on Saturday. He said, gee, I didn't know that. I'd never learned that until you said that to me. I didn't know that. There's so many things we don't know about one another. That's something that we could use digital media for to our advantage, as it were, to take, to turn, lemons into lemonade.
No, if you want or not, if you like or not, digital media is a part, this a part of life, a part of our education. It is this question: how can we deal with that? You cannot say digital media or not. It is a part of our society, a part of our future. Because of that, we cannot say no digital media. But how can we deal? What kind of competence we need is next question.
Well, thank you both for this conversation. It's rich and challenging all at the same time. I am going to invite now the other participants today to raise a hand, to put something in the chat. What are you thinking? What questions come up for you? What's triggered in you? How have they sparked you? Elizabeth, I see a hand.
Good morning, everyone. have a good day when you get to it. It's already started here. I'm thankful for the insights of Hanan and Ednan. It's been great. Especially, I want to talk about the whole issue of how important conversation is and dialogue and that kind of thing. Years ago, like in the 1970s and 80s, I was part of a religious education curriculum project team in the Queensland Education Department, where we were trying to restart religious education in the public school. We were providing multi-faith resources for the volunteer teachers from the religious groups to go into the schools to teach the children in the public schools. So very strange system, but that was the system. The key thing is that we were trying as educators of these folks to help the people to distinguish between fact type statements and belief type statements. So I'll use from the Christian example. A fact type statement is Jesus was crucified on a Friday. Fact type statement. Different belief type statement is Jesus died for the sins of the world. And most of our religious educators want to treat belief statements as truth statements. So trying to separate what is truth from what is falsehood in dialogue, in conversation, is really important. So I'm fascinated that now, 40 years later, or 50 years later, wherever it was, we're now having to distinguish between truth and fake. And that's an increasing extra language level. And so I'm wondering about whether the whole misunderstandings, ignorance that we have from one another, we need to turn our belief statements into fact type statements. So, for example, we tell people to say, Christians believe Jesus died for the sins of the world. That is a Christian belief. That's a fact type statement. That's what Christians believe. Trying to help them to ground their statements in who believes it or I believe it, so that conversation can be an open thing about our differences in beliefs. But I think that the language issue is such an important one, and so part of the problem for the digital media stuff is that I think it's mixed up, and that's what we've been talking about. The truth fake stuff is that we were so concerned to communicate our own beliefs that we don't recognize them as beliefs and how they influence our lives. And when we start sharing about those things, that's what I think the dialogue or where dialogue brings us. Comments.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
In Islamic context, dialogue we have in European countries more than 50 years, dialogue between church and Islamic communities. We are coming together, we are talking to each other, we are eating together and we are talking good things, you are brother, my sister. But result of this kind of dialogues is, from my perspective, is very poor. The content of dialogue at the moment in digital media, we are working really on it every day. It is not the question of Jesus, prophet, or God. It is more than this question. In Islamic context, it's a big question in social media, whether a democratic society is desired or not. It is our society or not. The challenge is more than Jesus or Muhammad. It is big think what we are learning from digital media. For example, in social media, we are not talking with people. If you read our posting, we are, posting, I mean, more than thousands. That is more an internal Islamic debate about who is really Muslim, who is not, and who must be accepted a Muslim or not. I think the debate in social media is different than, a dialogue between church and mosque. We have no problems, for example, in differently cities in Europe between church and mosque. They are very close to each other, but we have different conflicts between majority and minority in different societies in Europe. I think challenge is more than religious. If you look what is the problem, religions are a part of this problem, but main problem is more, I think, different than religious desires, actually.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that comment, and it's really interesting to hear how this had played out so long ago in Australia. But I tend to agree with Ednan. I mentioned this Project Links, which has brought out a large group of learning scientists into the faculty with which I'm affiliated at the University of Haifa. And one of my colleagues, Sarit Barzilai, is one of the leaders in this field, and they published a special issue of in the Journal of Learning Sciences, and the special issue was on the era of post-truth. And when I heard that Sarit was editing this, I tried in vain to convince her that the term post-truth was a terribly divisive and derisive concept, because if there is no concept of truth, then the difference between a fact statement and a belief statement totally dissolves. It allows some people to talk about fake news and other people to talk about other things. But if we live in an era of post-truth, how is it possible for us, in the context of people of different faiths, to cultivate the possibility of mutual respect for different faiths? I tend to agree with, I spent most of my life writing about and thinking about interfaith dialogue. And after October 7th, I was devastated that the interfaith dialogue in which I'd participated my whole life didn't seem to have any impact on my progressive colleagues. And I wasn't the only one that felt this way. Many of those of us on the center left of the religious political spectrum felt abandoned in that way, which is a failure of religious dialogue. It's evidence of what Ednan was saying, that's the negative side. And it may be that we need to create some models of digital conversation that can offer some alternative to what's being put out there currently. Since I agree with Ednan entirely that we can't control it, but we can contribute to it.
Mm-hmm.
In that vein, Mary, do you want to speak what you posted in the chat?
Yeah, sure. I was just noting that I think one of the key challenges we're facing in digitality is that we all know how important context is, and yet we are living amidst context collapse. So here in the United States, for instance, it's not even about truth. We don't agree on facts. And the reason we don't agree on facts is because the contexts that shape the information people receive is so different. So for me, one of the questions about how we do this work of religious education, of interfaith learning, is how do we build relationality? How do we build relational strength, right? To build context together. And, some of that can happen in YouTube, some of it can happen in other spaces, but but in the midst of AI, we're going to have to really rely on the power of our relationships. And I think an organization like REA can build some of those relationships, even as maybe they frayed in the last 2 years. So it's a comment more than a question.
Thank you. Other questions from the group or comments? There's a lot happening. There's a lot riding on this conversation for the planet. What thoughts do you bring to it? Russell.
I'm sorry. I'm getting a message. I'm going to turn off my audio and see if somebody else goes first. I'm having noise in the background here.
Okay. Anyone else? Hands raised. Chats. People, come on. We've had rich commentary from the group and a lot of others, a lot of our other sessions. We can do this. Yeah, Mary.
Okay, let me wade right into it and note that I think one of the challenges that we face, at least I would say I face in the United States right now, we have a president with who persists in making very strong assertions that the world I live in and the information I pay attention to believes are false. I'm not sure the president believes they're false, but the information I receive believes that it's false. And that president and that administration has weaponized the notion of anti-Semitism in a way that is crushing some of our higher education institutions. I'm an alum from Harvard. I'm an alum from Yale, as well as Boston College. And Harvard right now is facing huge amounts of federal pressure. And part of what I think is hard about all of this is that people are watching violence all over the world and not knowing what to do about it, not knowing how to deal with it. And then when a government says, you know, you should be afraid of these people and you should not say these things and you should, right? So I'm curious from the standpoint of both of you are educators in traditions that in the United States are largely minoritized. And I know that you've learned something about what it is to tend religious identity from the standpoint of a you know, an intentionally minoritized community. What do the rest of us need to learn from you in particular about what it means to push back against these very yeah, I mean, I don't even have language for it anymore. I just know that I'm terrified by what my government is doing.
So I'll jump into this with a couple of comments. My first comment is, I think one of the things we need to learn how to do is to communicate across this difference. So as a Jewish person, I'm not an alum of Harvard. My daughter's an alum of Harvard. I'm an alum of Stanford. We used to call Harvard the Stanford of the East. But when I see language like the weaponization of anti-Semitism, so here's what I want to know. Why is it that my progressive colleagues aren't standing up for the Jews when hate is being spewed against Jews on college campuses, like those people with whom I otherwise disagree with politically? Where are my progressive colleagues? Where are they? They've vanished. So when I hear weaponization of anti-Semitism from a historical Jewish point of view, I say, we're going to take friends wherever we can get them. We get evangelicals with whom I don't agree on any theological issue, but they like Israel. Okay, so we have Huckabee, and he's the ambassador, and he likes Israel. So I don't agree with him anything else, but he's willing to help me where I need it. Where are my friends with whom I've developed relationships over decades, where are they?
So
Where
Hanan,
are they?
what would be, because I would like to think of myself as somebody who's worked with you for a very long time, right? What would be concrete, pragmatic ways in which you would receive from me or from someone else? What would feel like it's support?
So actually, from you, Mary, I've always felt support, including right after October 7th when you wrote to me, and I really appreciated it. But this is not about a personal thing, but it's about the sense we have within our own liberal progressive world that the other side is wrong. So the other side is weaponizing. So what I was trying to use with example by saying, well, the other side may be weaponizing, but in this case, from my point of view, they're doing something that's productive, whereas the side with which I otherwise agree is not doing something productive. So is it possible for us to create a conversation across that difference? In which we don't demonize the I mean, I dislike Trump. I promise you, I dislike President Trump as much as you do. But on the other hand, he was willing to protect my people from annihilation with a nuclear bomb by Iran in a way that I don't think the presidents that I would otherwise like was willing to do. So now other people may or may not agree with that political assessment. But what I'm saying is there's another point of view here. There's another point of view on the other side. And I happen to be able to open the door and climb into the other point of view because part of me is pulled by my religious and Jewish identity to the people that are willing to help me when my own friends have been less available to do that. So is it possible for us to create a conversation? I'll give you just another example. Immediately after October 7th, I wrote to Ednan and I said, let's produce a common statement. We wrote the statement together about dialogue. We wrote a statement. We negotiated together. He commented about what I should say about what it should say about Palestinians. I commented about what it should say, and we wrote it. And we weren't able to find colleagues that were willing to join us in order to put out that statement. We ended up not putting out a statement because we don't have those relationships that we thought would sustain us. Didn't sustain us. How can we create models of conversation across difference in which we don't demonize the alternative point of view, but in which we engage it and have conversations with it? And that's something we might be able to model online.
Yeah, here is a second your problem. You know, for example, from Islamic part, we have a different situation. For example, after this, for example, text from you, I asked some colleagues, for example, some of them in Turkey, for example, they say he was one of the colleagues was in prison many years. And, you know, the colleagues in Islamic countries have different problems. For example, solidarity now with Jewish people means in many Islamic countries, you can lose your job, you can lose your family, you can lose your life as well. Now, situation in Turkey is really Turkey is, you know, what some democratic countries, but I am talking about Turkey, about the situation. To talk about it, not easy. But we learned from Gaza a lot. We talk about it, not after, for example, October 7. Before, we have to talk other victims as well. I learned from Gaza that we start before that those things happens in our life. For the Muslim colleagues, Hanan, it is not, at the moment, it is not easy to talk about Israel. It is, in European countries, it's possible, but in Islamic countries, it is a big challenge and dangerous to talk about it. I can give you many examples about it. Some sentence, some text, it is your end in different Islamic countries.
We have another hand up. Lauren, what can you contribute here?
Can you hear me?
Sure thing.
Okay, yeah, no, this has been fascinating, and I need to apologize. I missed some of this, so I hope my lack of, I hope that doesn't show, but I did miss the middle of the conversation. I have a couple of points. I find it fascinating, and I appreciate both of the speakers' comments. As far as the anti-Semitism and what Mary has spoke to about our government, watching how these bills are coming up in Congresses to bring in a certain definition of anti-Semitism, to make it illegal to criticize anything about Israel, which then creates the freedom of speech issue for other people, which in some ways can cause more of a pretext for anti-Semitism, including the bill, Senate Bill 558, that says, well, there was an exemption put onto it by Marjorie Taylor Greene that Christians would be allowed to continue to teach that the Jews killed Jesus. And this gets back to what Elizabeth was saying about what's a fact, what's a belief. And historically, we know that's a pretext for anti-Semitism. So on the other hand, I'm not in favor of those bills because I would rather have the freedom of speech that everyone has. So then to get to the sort of the tension that Hanan spoke of with, like, well, you know, what can we do to support Jews, and I'm also Jewish, is that I fear that focusing on the anti-Semitism is too narrow, and that we need to be focusing on anti-humanitarianism, anything that is anti anyone, not just Jews, but also Muslims, Palestinians, and all the minorities, and come together to what Ednan spoke of with solidarity, that we need more solidarity and make the umbrella wider and bigger to include everyone. So when Hanan, when you ask where's the progressive left, I think the progressive left will show up if it's if we're banding together to stop anything, anyone, not just anti-Semitism, but include that and transcend it. I don't know if that's helpful. And I do think, back to the question on technology, teaching more about different religions, more interfaith education in the younger age classrooms from the get-go would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Lauren. Everyone, I am conscious of time. We basically have 1 minute left. I'm okay staying, but the way and so we can linger after Russell, you're, yes. All right, we'll take one last comment from Russell and we'll close.
I wanted to apologize for my answering machine going off when I was going to speak before. And just to say what I was going to say is the interfaith dialogue, thank you both, our speakers. The sort that they engage in is so important. And also for those of us like mine who are part of primarily Christian organizations, institutions, representation is important. After October 7th, our sole Jewish faculty member was so important to have at the table as we were drafting those comments. The fact that we bring in the occasional Muslim teaching staff member, and the fact that we have some diverse student body is so important. Now, some of that's lost in the classroom as we go and have classes on Zoom. People are just less aware that they're talking and making statements with people of other faiths in the room, which helps us think theologically and ethically in a different way. And so that's, again, with everything that's gained by technology, by distance learning, and some of that inclusion, part of that, at least in my experience, in our experience, is lost. That even if we have diversity in the classroom, it's less effective in terms of theological pedagogy if it's in a cyber classroom rather than people looking at each other face to face as they theologize. So that was my comment.
Thank you. Thank you. Clearly we have done a job of communicating, listening across difference today, and that's what matters. And that's the practice that we've been trying to do for a long time at REA. And I invite all of the members to think through how might we continue this dialogue as an organization into the future. In our writings, in our conversations, do we start making more videos? Is there a way for us to TikTok our way into demonstrating to others how to listen to each other? Anyway.
Thank you so much
Thank you
for inviting us.
for inviting me and speak
Hanan.
here. Thank you so much for
Wonderful.
everybody. And good, here is good evening. Oh, okay.
Guten Abend.